Hello, fellow parents and educators. Thank you for joining me at Education Evolution, where we are disrupting the status quo in today's learning models. We talk about present-day education, what's broken, who's fixing it, and how. I'm Dr. Maureen O'Shaughnessy, your host and founder of Education Evolution and the Microschool Coalition, where we are fiercely committed to changing the narrative, to reimagining the education landscape and creating learning that serves all children and prepares them to thrive. Welcome back, everybody. I am so thrilled. Today's guest is one of the Pacific Northwest parenting experts, Kira Dorrian, and she is half of the future-focused parenting team with a podcast, videos, online courses, and her own book for expectant parents. She has also been a very gracious coach as I navigate being a newbie in this world of podcasts. So, Kira, I am so grateful that you are here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to get to talk with you.
Yay! When I look at what you do, I love that you use an end game approach. If we don't know where we're heading, how in the world can we get there? Asking the question, what do I want this precious young being to grow into to be a thriving adult? Can you talk more about this perspective and how it guides you?
Yeah, absolutely. My co-host and partner, Dina Thayer, and I, for years, were working in various aspects of the parenting world. She was in the birth world predominantly. I've been in the mental health world with about 30% of my practice focused on kids. And what we realized was that a lot of expectant couples spend a lot of time thinking about their birthing day, which is super important. We're big fans of the birthing day. But kind of like a wedding, we see a lot of couples get so focused on that birthing day that they're not thinking about the long game of parenting or their marriage, if you use the wedding analogy. And when we stop to think about, well, what's the longer journey? What's the thing that we're going to be doing the rest of our lives? It's parenting. And so we started looking at, where's that gap and why are so many families underwater? And I think a lot of it comes from not having that end in mind and really doing sometimes what feels easiest or most expedient, but not necessarily what feels like is going to be the best choice for the adult you're trying to raise. So a great example is chores. We talk about this all the time. It's kind of like our main issue that comes up when we have these conversations. It's like a lot of parents, they don't want to have the fight about chores. They get tired of it and they give up and they go, okay, forget it. I just don't have the energy to fight with you about this. But when you're thinking long term about the adult you're trying to raise, and adults need to have diligence and they need to care for their things and they need to, keep a home that allows them to be mentally well. And oftentimes like a cluttered, crazy house isn't good for our mental health. Well, then it changes the game. It's like, well, am I willing to push through the hardship of getting kids to do chores in order to give them these life skills that they're really going to need in adulthood? And it becomes easier to make the hard choice. We never say it's easy because parenting is not easy. But it's easier when we think long term, when we think future focused. And so a great question we encourage parents to think about is, does this choice matter in 20 years? And there are going to be some times where it doesn't. And that's great because then you get to go, okay, well, I can just let that go, forget about it. But a lot of the time, actually, it really does. And when we think about it that way, it changes our actions as parents. And it actually helps us get more on top of our parenting and feel more empowered and more in control and more like we're running a household that's functioning and healthy and happy and well.
That makes such perfect sense. I know our students are like, why do I need to learn this? Why does it matter? So it seems like it's the same for the parents that you're coaching and for all parents. Why is it important for me to fight this battle over chores? And you have a really clear perspective. Do you find that it shifts how parents tackle and take on and the energy they have around? I mean, do some people really embrace this and it shifts their parenting model?
Oh, it's game changing because I think a lot of people are just trying to survive. And that's actually our tagline, that we take families from surviving to thriving. We don't want people just surviving. We don't want you underwater. We want you like swimming and freely, And so when you start kind of thinking long term, all the things that we talk about that fall into place that allow you to do that, they actually empower you as a parent. So another great example is we're big fans of rehearsing. It's really hard to expect kids to meet our expectations without giving them a chance to practice. So for example, on Halloween, my kids and I rehearse the day before every year. since they started trick-or-treating, because I wanted children, some of the values that are important in my home is that I have polite and respectful children who are considerate of other people, that are kind and caring and appreciative and show gratitude and experience gratitude. So all of that happens when you're trick-or-treating. Like, it's such a small thing, but all of that is at play. And so when my kids knock on the door and they say trick-or-treat, I didn't want kids that grab the candy and run. I wanted kids who were saying thank you and happy Halloween and engaging in like their community. And so we practice that. And what happens is once you've given them a chance to rehearse it, then on Halloween, their body knows what to do. Their little mouths and their brains have already wrapped around those words that they're supposed to say. And then what do you know? They do it and they say it and they get this positive feedback. And that just perpetuates everything in this positive way. And that's future focused, right? That's me going, in order for me to teach my kids what they need to know on Halloween, I need to be thinking right now about what are the ways I can set them up for success.
That makes perfect sense. And we all need practice and dress rehearsals before the real thing. So to consciously build those in, you're giving your kids this gift so they can go out and succeed and then get reinforced for succeeding and build more on that. And you're helping this next generation be kind and gracious. I'm impressed. That's really cool.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things that we are really on our soapbox about is that every family should have a set of values. And that's going to look totally different for every single family. There's not a right or wrong. But as parents, if we can get clear on what are my top 5 to 10 family values, what are the things that matter, what are those character traits that I want to instill, then we can parent toward them. And so we have in our home a list of 10 values. And when things come up, positive or negative, we're often referring back to those values and saying, oh, wow, I did it just this morning. I said to my kids, wow, you showed such diligence this morning when you were tackling those hard math problems. I'm so impressed. Diligence is important in our family. It's one of our values, and you really met that value today. Thank you. And on the flip of that, when something happens that doesn't match a value, you can say, was that a kind choice? We value kindness in our house. I wonder if you could make a kinder choice. And so that those values set this foundation for every parenting choice you're going to make. And it actually makes parenting a little bit easier when you have that foundation set up.
Perfect. And then the kids know the rules that you're playing by. It sounds like everybody can play the same game because you've set up really clear expectations. And that makes sense. We call them habits of success at our school, and grit is one of them. And we want our kids to have this toolkit before they're adults. So I love that you are doing that. I wonder, how does this tie into the whole concept of emotional intelligence? Because that gets bantered around a lot in schools and in parenting groups.
Yeah, that's my jam. That's my favorite thing to talk about. In fact, I have an online course about it, and we have a podcast episode about it. Like, for me and for my co-host, everything comes back to emotional intelligence, because as parents, we really believe parents need to have strong boundaries in order for kids to feel safe. And like you said, to know the rules of the game, that's so important. But at the same time, within those boundaries, we have to have so much room for feelings. And so we say a lot, one of my favorite phrases is, your feelings are okay, but this behavior is not. It's so important that kids know that feelings are always welcome. I'm always going to be here to talk with you about them. I want to hear your feelings. I want to hear your opinion. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to move the boundary. And so that for us is the tie-in, is that the feelings have to be allowed, acceptable, processed. We have to teach kids how to engage with those feelings in a way that is both socially appropriate, but also effective for them to process, and give them those tools so that as they get older, they can start to do that for themselves. But all of that has to happen within the context of some strong foundational boundaries that help them feel safe and help them succeed.
That, again, makes perfect sense, because emotions can be so overwhelming at every stage of childhood and adolescence. So those clear boundaries and keeping it safe are such a gift to give kids as they explore the successful and appropriate ways of feeling their feelings.
Absolutely. I mean, even in adulthood, right? I know a lot of adults that could use some emotion coaching. And, I'm someone with a mental health background, and I'm still sometimes caught off guard by my feelings. Like, wow, I am really bummed today. What's going on for me today? So having tools and giving our kids tools to be able to name their feelings. On the emotional intelligence episode, I share the 3 N's method that we talk about. So naming the feeling, normalizing the feeling, like, hey, guess what? Actually, it's totally normal to be scared before a test, or I was scared before a test, or normalizing. It's normal to get sad about stuff. It's okay to be sad for a little while. Like, we all get sad sometimes, not trying to push those feelings away. And then nurturing that feeling is the 3rd N. can, so that as we nurture, we're not only showing our kids, I get you and I feel you and I empathize with you. And here are actually some tools to help you learn how to process those feelings for yourself.
Lovely. Are there particular tools that are kind of go-tos for you right now as kids and families are navigating this whole pandemic?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think one of our 3 kind of pillars of the future-focused parenting philosophy is having a strong why. And when we talk about that, what we mean is that when you have a clear why, like, who am I trying to raise? Why am I making this choice? Why am I rehearsing Halloween yet again? Why am I breaking up yet another sibling squabble? Whatever it is. When you have that why, it makes it that much easier to do something that's hard. The how becomes a lot easier. And I think right now in this pandemic, having a strong why is probably the most important thing you can do. We all need to figure out the why of what we're trying to achieve during this time. And that's going to be different for everyone. For some people, it's going to be education. They're going to be like, what matters to me in this time? The most important why is that my kids come out educated. For some people, it's going to be the most important why is that my kids laugh every day. For some people, it's going to be the most important why is that we come together in closeness as a family. And you can have several whys, but getting really clear on what actually matters to you right now and getting okay with the idea of letting stuff go that doesn't match that top tier value. It's like, we just can't do everything right now. We can't. And so looking at the mental health of our children and what's the thing that they need most, and also what do they need from us right now? Because it's like when you talk about new moms and, you got to put your oxygen mask on first, right? So we have to make sure that we are caring for ourselves in a way that allows us to be the parents that our kids need us to be right now. So coming back to that why, whatever that is for your family, and then leaning into that and trying to let some of the other stuff go.
Yes. And that oxygen mask piece, especially with parents and kids all at home at the same time, that's a vital reminder. Thank you for remembering that we need to do that and for sharing it with our audience.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think parents often, in an attempt to try and be everything to everyone, forget that actually sometimes has a really negative impact on your family. We have to do good self-care so that we can be the best parents that we can be.
Yes. I want to shift a bit because you and I, when we chatted before, you totally get our school, Lead Prep, being a micro school, and you had an experience in a smaller school. So I'd love to hear what your experience was and why you think that was important in part of your growing up experience.
Oh, I'm so excited to get to talk about this. So I went to an alternative middle school here in Washington State. It was in Bellevue. It has since closed, sadly, due to some bureaucracy. And it was called Olympus Northwest. And it was 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. The whole school was about 100 kids total over those 3 grades. And it really had this, when I look back on it, it was a brilliant model. It took the most challenging years, I think, those middle school years, and just turned the concept of school on its head and looked at what do kids at this age need, like beyond just academics. What do they need? And it was all social stuff, right? Like kids are really trying to figure themselves out socially at that age. So we sat on couches instead of at desks. We called our teachers by their first names. We did a lot of student-led learning. So when I look back, what I think is so interesting is they found this beautiful balance between educating, like we still really got an education, but really leaning into who is each child and what are their interests. So examples, they wanted to put on a school play, and there were 3 of us that were desperate to write a play. So we wrote it. And they literally put on our school play, which was for middle schoolers, like very angsty,
Yes.
And the 3 of us just got out of classes for like 6 weeks to go write this play. We had all school meetings, which were epically awesome. And they did a lot of coming to consensus. So you would put a thumbs up if you were all for whatever was being voted for, a thumbs to the side if you could live with it, and a thumbs down if you couldn't live with it. And if anybody had a thumbs down, even if it was a student, it didn't pass. And so we had to debate and we had to discuss and we had to compromise and work as a team, both with teachers and with students, to get to a place where everyone could at least agree, at least thumbs to the side. And that was an amazing thing at 12, 13 years old to be told you have a voice. Like, not only do you have a voice, your voice actually matters. Your voice influences how our school runs. and just taught really good listening skills, compromising skills, all of that. When we hired a new teacher, this happened in my 8th grade year, I think we hired a new teacher, and the panel for hiring the teacher was 3 teachers and 3 students. And the students' voices mattered just as much as the teachers because we had to learn from this person. I mean, it's stuff like that was just, it was an incredible experience. Like I get teary talking about it, and everyone I know from that school has the same reaction when we get to talk about our experience. Like we have all grown into people who feel their voice matters in the world. The majority of the school graduates are extremely successful. And it was a school that was really set up for either people like me who were academically strong, but kind of weird, or kids that were really like on the cusp of becoming kids that would probably drop out. And it was beautiful to watch that coming together too, because you've got these kids that are academically strong and maybe socially a little awkward. And then you've got these kids that are socially comfortable, but academically not. And the way they work together and help each other out, and how many kids just benefited from each other and felt at home and safe. And we could be who we are. I am who I am because of that school, without question.
Oh my gosh, it sounds magical. And of course, kids being seen, heard, valued, safe. Wouldn't we want that for every single kid?
Yes, absolutely. Every kid deserves that. And it's hard. Like my kids are in the public school system, and I see the challenges. Like it is truly tricky to meet every kid where they are when you have 22,000 students in your district. I will say Olympus was a public school. It was free, and it was through the public school system. It was considered just an alternative school. And that was pretty neat too. They had a lottery system, and that's how you got in.
Nice. Yeah, I know our main campus is in the Lake Washington School District, and they have choice schools with lottery systems, and the waiting lists are miles long. Parents are craving smaller, more specialized models. So I think that's great that you had that experience, and that you can see looking back that it had a profound effect moving forward in your life.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, I'm sure I learned things too, like academically. Like I said, I know I got an education. I took classes I was interested in. Oh, this was the other amazing thing they did. Every year in April, I think it was over our spring break. We didn't take a spring break. We went on what they called Alternatives Week. So there were 4 different options, and each teacher took a different trip. And so one was the Ashland Shakespeare Festival. And so you spent a whole semester or a whole quarter studying all the plays that you were going to see at the festival. And then they took 20 middle schoolers down to Ashland for a week to go see theater. One was Mesa Verde. So there was one of our teachers who was really into rock climbing and hiking. And so he would, you'd study the terrain and you'd study the history of the area. And then he'd take all these kids on this massive, trek to Mesa Verde for a week. We had one year where we all went to Mexico. And there was one at home too, because you did have to pay for those things. So for families that maybe didn't have the means, they made sure they always had something at home that was equally amazing. So stuff like that. It's everything you hear about what these alternative education programs can be. They just allow more space, more flexibility, more opportunity for kids to lean into what they actually care about and what's going to shape them as a person. It's future focused. It is. It's not I was never going to be a scientist. That just wasn't going to happen. So I had my minimum science requirements. And outside of that, I didn't have to take science classes. I could take the classes that truly interested me. I was at the Ashland Shakespeare Festival every year, so.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. So on that note, my final question for you is, if you had this magic wand for education and for our youth, especially middle school and high school, what would you wish upon our U.S. education model so that we could be amazing and kids could be as thrilled 20 years later about their experience as you are about yours?
That's a great question. I think 2 things come to mind right away. The first one is, I personally feel, just from my own experience, that by middle school, kids actually have a sense of what they're interested in and what they're not interested in, and what they're good at and what they're not good at. And that doesn't mean that things don't change as people get older. But as I said, like I knew by middle school, I was not going into a field that required math or science. I just wasn't. It wasn't of interest. I wasn't any good at it. And I think that if the education system could give just a bit more flexibility to, do we really need to be taking trigonometry? Like I don't use trig ever. Ever. Right? So did I need to have that experience? I appreciate that kids need to be challenged and they need to have grit and all of that. But I think we get that through the elementary school years. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind, is giving kids this opportunity to be a little more in charge of their own interests and their own academic setup. And then the second thing is that idea of kids having a voice. I think that middle school, and I see it in elementary school too, and it really hurts my heart. Like kids are just taught, sit up straight, listen, even in the nicest, most beautiful ways. The school my kids go to is wonderful. I love it. But it has this kind of like fit in the box mentality, even without meaning to, because our school loves diversity and individualism and all that stuff. But just by the nature of having to get 500 kids to walk in a straight line, you have to have some of that. And so I wish there was a way we could figure out how to do less of that, how to leave more space for their voices to be heard, And I think the final thing I would say is, from a mental health perspective, we spend a lot of time talking about the mental health of middle school and high schoolers. And I think the big mistake that the education system makes is not realizing that the mental health of middle school and high schoolers is formed in elementary school. By the time they get to middle school, it's way too late. They are formed. So actually, the mental health needs to be prioritized in elementary school. And looking at the relationships, a great example is that a student is with a teacher the whole day, 5 days a week. And there's not a lot of wiggle room if there's a bad teacher fit. And the whole concept is like, oh, well, kids need to, they need to know how to navigate a boss they don't like. So this is a good thing for them. And I disagree. I think that it's a great thing in middle school and high school to have a teacher that you don't like and to have to navigate that when you're 13, 14, and that that's not about you, that teacher's got their own stuff going on, you've got your own stuff going on, and there's maybe some conflict there. In elementary school, children are, for lack of a better word, narcissistic, not in a bad way, just in a natural way. They think everything's about them, good or bad. When you're with a teacher 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, who doesn't like you, you think that's about you. And you develop a self-esteem based on that. And then we get to middle school and high school, and shockingly, these kids are having a hard time. And that's because in elementary school, their self-esteem was so knocked by a bad teacher or a bad situation or whatever it is. So we need to, just like you do the flip classroom, which I think is amazing, I think we have to flip this on its head and recognize that our young adults are informed by their childish experiences. So how can we lean into that so that we're protecting them later? That was a long answer to your question. I apologize.
No, love it. And I hadn't really framed mental health in that way for elementary kids. And I'm focused on middle and high school kids. And wow, that's so important. And Yes. We need your magic wand, Kira.
I know we do. I mean, it's a conversation I've had even with my kids' principal. They're very strict about if it's a bad fit, this is a good thing for them. And I've said, I could not disagree more. And I won't, if my kids end up in a bad fit, we will not send them because I know the damage that does. And it's not the same as in middle school when it's conflict. And same thing, like you don't have a boss 7 hours a day who controls when you eat and when you go to the bathroom. Like you're just never in that situation ever again. Why are we making our tiniest people go through that? It makes no sense to me. And then they get to middle school and high school and they only have to navigate that hard teacher for an hour. So, I could go on all day, but you get the gist of what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Yes. Very, very good suggestions for improving and helping our system evolve. So thank you, Kira. And thank you for joining today and sharing your expertise with our Education Evolution listeners.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and best of luck with the podcast. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you. Kira has so much information. I could have asked her gazillion more questions. Before I talk about some of the pieces of the interview, I want to remind you that in my show notes, I have her contact information, also 2 specific resources. I have the link to her online course for helping parents who are supporting a child with anxiety. With so many young people struggling with mental health issues, this is a wonderful resource. Also, her son has wanted to contribute to those that are suffering in this pandemic, and he wrote a book, and it is published and on Amazon. So 8-year-old Reese has his link in our show notes. So be sure to check out his book, and the money from that will go to charity to support those that are suffering because of the coronavirus. I was really impressed that her whole theme tied into future-focused thinking. From future-focused parenting, she talked about 2 points that I thought were really powerful. That we need to have values and habits of success. We need to set this foundation, this why. Here is why we do things. Here is why in schools we ask you to complete your homework. We're building grit. We're building perseverance. Sadly, our present educational model rarely allows for these values and habits to be embedded in the learning. We're still really focused on content and not the whole human being often. The other skill she mentioned was rehearsing, to give kids help in aligning with adult goals. I think this is powerful for our children. We also do that at Lead Prep, my micro school. We have Toastmasters, a public speaking club, weekly. So kids are rehearsing. What would it be like if they're in an interview? What if they have to improv and answer a question? We also have our 11th grade students try a college class, usually an online class with our support, to rehearse what is it going to be like to be in college. So rehearsing is a brilliant strategy. Another piece of this future-focused theme, she talked about the middle school that was so special for her, that it was a lottery system. And we have a lottery system near our school, and the waiting lists are incredible, hundreds for each small specialized school. Wouldn't it be something if our districts were able to listen to families and respond to this need by creating more of these small specialty public schools? That would help drive us into the future if we could hear our families and respond. Third, she talked about her future-focused middle school and being able to dive into her passions as a teen and having choice and voice in a middle school. That is micro school magic. It's not going to happen in schools with 1,000 kids. That's the beauty of small. These kinds of amazing things that have a lasting influence can be created. The fourth and final piece that she mentioned that I think we really need to take a look at and be more proactive on is focusing on mental health in the elementary school. I hadn't been aware that this formative time in their development really was making a difference in the mental health issues that we were seeing in middle school, high school, and beyond. We need to be proactive and invest in our children while they're developing their identities, and we need to create safe places and good fits between teachers and students. Again, that would be easier in smaller settings, I know. So thank you. I'm so glad that you joined us today and that we got to hear Kira share lots of suggestions on how we can be more proactive and more future focused. Thanks again for listening. To support the education evolution, subscribe so it lands in your podcast app and gets out to more decision makers. Then rate and review it. For more information and show notes, go to educationevolution.org. Education Evolution listeners, you are the ones to ensure we create classrooms where each student is seen, heard, valued, and thriving. We are in this together, and we need you. Let's go out and reach every student today. Over my career, I have led a variety of public and private schools, both internationally and in Washington State. This vast experience has allowed me to support teams in innovating in a wide variety of settings. Continuing to research best practices and apply all of this knowledge into my micro school and the schools and programs where I consult is very fun and rewarding. See the show notes for a link to a free consulting call with me. Fostering student success and connecting with great students is an absolute pleasure. Thank you for listening. Signing off, I am Maureen O'Shaughnessy, your partner in boldly reimagining education.